Ladies and gentlemen, amid the entire furore over India's Got Latent's episode that's seen not just anger but multiple FIRs against content creator Ranveer Alabadia, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has urged both social media platforms and over-the-top or OTT streaming services to comply with Code of Ethics under IT Rules 2021 that include 1. The necessity of self-regulation, 2. Age-based access control for content rated A to protect children from exposure to inappropriate material. Number 3, asking self-regulatory bodies of OTT platforms to take appropriate proactive action for violation of Code of Ethics by the platforms. Remember, this comes after a parliamentary panel last week asked the Information and Broadcasting Ministry to submit a note on the amendments needed in existing laws to clamp down on controversial content like the one involving Ranveer Alabadia amid bipartisan concern from MPs over the issue, sparking a debate on state-led regulation versus self-regulation vis-a-vis freedom of speech. This advisory, of course, follows Supreme Court's notice to the centre as well, warning them that it would not allow a vacuum to continue, referring to how social media and the OTT platforms operate. Meanwhile, there's a breaking news that's coming in at this point. Maharashtra Cyber Cell has issued another summon. This is the second summon which has been issued to YouTuber, in fact, Samay Raina in India's Got Latent case after he failed to appear on 18th February. This is the breaking news that's coming in at this point. There's a second summon which has been issued to YouTuber Samay Raina in the India's Got Latent case. He is the host of India's Got Latent. Well, returning to our topic of discussion, let me introduce my panelists at this point. Pavan Duggal, who's a cyber security expert, as well as Mithun Vijay Kumar, who's a political analyst. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. Mr. Pavan Duggal, let's straight go to you. How do you look at what the Information and Broadcasting Ministry has just said? It's gone on to remind people, particularly the OTT platforms as well as social media live streamers, to ensure they follow the Code of Ethics. What really is this Code of Ethics when it comes to being enforced? Does it have enough teeth?
Well, on 25th of February 2021, the government came up with the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 2021. They got subsequently amended on 6th of April 2023 to incorporate therein the inclusion of over-the-top or OTT service providers. Now, one thing is very clear. These particular rules are in two broad categories. One is in a category of specific rules for intermediaries. The second category is the Digital Media Ethics Code, which is stipulated under the said rules and the schedule thereof, which is basically stipulating common minimum standards of civilized behavior that needs to be followed when people are publishing or transmitting content on social media or OTT platforms. And hence, these rules and the Media Ethics Code give a twin kind of mandatory responsibility, both on the OTT players and also on the users, that they will not go ahead and publish any content which is in violation of the law, which is against community standards, which is pornographic, obscene, or otherwise violating
and what if they do?
Any other person's rights in that regard. So we have seen that despite the code coming in, the rules have not been effectively being enforced, specifically in the context of OTT platforms. People are complying with the IT Rules 2021 in breach rather than in observance. And that's one particular reason, because there are no penal consequences for you not to comply, for you to follow or to face in the event you don't comply, is a major drawback of these rules. Today, if I, as an OTT platform, do not comply with the rules of 2021, there's nothing much that can be done against me. Well, because it's not a criminal offense, at best I could get some notice, some advisory, and there are no penal consequences. Now, the bigger consequence is that if the OTT service provider or the intermediary fails to comply with these guidelines, then they could potentially be losing their statutory exemption from legal liability. But I think service providers are not bothered with it, and consequently, this particular rule is being more obeyed in breach rather than in observance.
All right. If I can get in Mithun Vijay Kumar at this point. Mithun, how do you look at this? You just heard Pavan Duggal. He's saying these are just advisory at best. There's no penal consequences at best. How do you look at this? Is this a mode of self-regulation that really must be enforced? Is it enough?
As of now, what I understand is that the whole uh, regulation that the government is trying to bring in is about content categorization, and we all know that OTT platforms are showing all kinds of content. Some are good, some are bad, and some are outright inappropriate. So if we take the recent incident of Ranveer Alabadia, it's just one example of how content sometimes crosses the line. Although we have some regulations in place, of course, the implementation part when it comes to the implementation level, it is not done properly, is what I understand. And even I had, personally flagged one of the content that was published on one of the OTT platforms 2 years back, and it, I received a huge attack on the internet from the fans of that show. That it's all about freedom of speech, and how can you even think about moderating content on OTT platforms? So the government is now at this point, they are actually asking these platforms to clearly classify their content, so people can make informed choices. And like every day we see these cases where content meant for adults, it's easily accessible to children. And the fact is that the current system of classification that majority of the platforms have, it is not working well, and that's why the government is stepping in to fix it. And the recent discussion, it's not about censorship, it's about making sure people, especially parents, I think there was a specific reference that parents know exactly what kind of content the children are watching. And this is yeah this has to be, this was supposed to be done a long back. I mean, moderation had to be in place, like proper regulations should have been in place. But it's not just the government's decision right now. The courts in India have also raised concerns about the OTT content, like the Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, all have said
Okay.
that vulgarity in online shows must be controlled. And the courts have even suggested that new laws should be introduced for this. So when both the government and judiciary are agreeing on something, it's very clear that action is needed at this point. And many developed countries have strict content
Pavan
classification
Duggal, if
rules.
you could come in
So
at
India
this
should also
point,
have.
Pavan Duggal, there was once a term which was very frequently used, and that was the nanny state. And there was a reason why that term used to be used. Now, how much is something that a state should be going ahead and trying to enforce? Yes, the state is responsible, but there has to be a mechanism to go about doing it. For example, what Mr. Mithun is referring to is the set of draft rules that were brought out and then withdrawn, particularly because there was a huge concern around how digital media and news media was also included in that ecosystem, raising questions about how there could be a clampdown or a crackdown of sorts if at all they do not meet with the standards, so-called standards, quote unquote, of what is perceived as correct. So that's one part of it. So here's the larger question. While yes, people say that we need regulation, there needs to be access control, all of that can be done even without a nanny state. Can't it be, Mr. Pavan Duggal?
Well, we are not talking of a nanny state here. We are talking of trying to uphold principles and values which are enshrined in the Constitution. So everybody in India has got a fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1) of the Constitution of India. However, it's not an absolute right, and it is subject to certain reasonable restrictions that can be imposed by the state in the interest of sovereignty, security, integrity of India, friendly relations with other nations, public order, decency, or morality, or even to prevent the commission of any cognizable offense. Now, in this case, what is the law saying? The law is saying, please don't publish content which is pornographic, which is lascivious, which appeals to the prurient interests, the effect of which is to tend to deprave and corrupt the minds of those who are likely to see, read, or hear the same. Now, That's the guidelines, and the IT rules 2021 are only reiterating what the law does not want you to do. Well, the law has even come up with the consequences for criminal punishment under Section 67 of the IT Act if you do so. But nonetheless, it wants the service providers, the OTT players who are intermediaries, to ensure that their platform does not become the hotbed
Right.
for publication or dissemination of this kind of a content. So I don't think by coming up with these rules, the government or the state is a nanny state. On the contrary, it's going to uphold the standards of community decency that are expected in the Indian context. But if the government
Mr.
or
Pavan
the
Duggal,
state
here's
becomes
the thing.
completely silent,
Here's the
there
thing.
will be anarchy.
While you are
There will
talking
be no
about the rules that are
mechanism of any
existing,
kind of rule and
everybody
order.
would want some kind of filter that functions. But Mr. Pavan Duggal, there's also a self-regulatory body, a quorum that should be functioning again under the ethics code. That clearly is not functioning. Because that's not functioning, you can't have a clampdown or a crackdown from the state. That's what I'm trying to get in. The existing code of ethics provides for self-regulation, but that self-regulation must happen through a self-regulatory board, which has clearly failed.
And because self-regulation has failed in the Indian context, the government has no choice to come in. Now, had the industry been unanimous in their approach, they would have said, hey guys, let's come up with strong self-regulatory mechanisms so that we don't allow the governments to come in this space. But you were given 3 or 4 full years to go ahead and comply with this. You've chosen to make a mockery of self-regulation. Your self-regulatory bodies are not working. They don't give any kind of effective remedy. And most of the time, it appears to be more a justification of what the service providers are doing. So therefore, I believe because the lay people have realized that it's a failure because they don't get any effective remedies, and that's the reason why the government has now come up with this advisory. Fortunately, the OTT players should also thank their hands. But right now, it's only an advisory. But if they choose not to put their house in order, I would not be surprised if the government comes up with more stringent regulations, defining more stringent legal liability and consequences. Well, that's very much possible. That's why it's always said, the moment there's a small window of self-regulation, the industry must go ahead and lap up with both the hands so that it can actually lock and prevent the government from coming in with more regulation.
Mithun Vijay, particularly in a democracy, it's very important that several aspects of them function under self-regulatory norms. I mean, you have independence of judiciary to say for one. Some people may argue not everything is well and perfect with them. But it is an independence. So is independence of media, as it were. And of course, you have lapses, you have failures that have happened at several times. But there's a stark difference where a self-regulatory mechanism completely collapses vis-a-vis a state trying to push it through. Very strong distinctions between the two.
Is it to me, Sneha?
Yes, Mr. Mithun, go ahead, please.
Yeah, see, this is not some kind of a rule that is imposed by the government to restrict or to. This is not censorship. It's about accountability. The government is not telling OTT platforms what to create. It's simply making sure that they classify their content correctly and restrict access where necessary. This is about accountability and not control. And at the end of the day, this move benefits everyone: parents, children, and society as a whole. And a mature democracy is one where free speech is actually respected, but public responsibility is also upheld. And this is what exactly the government is ensuring, is what I see. And of course, there are a lot of comments coming in, the free speech argument, all that. I definitely know some people will say that this is an attack on free speech and all, but let's break it down. Is this move limiting the freedom of speech? I don't think it is, because Constitution definitely gives us free speech, but with reasonable restrictions, like the fellow panelist said. And if the content is vulgar, it is harmful to a certain section of the society or to children, or it disturbs, public morality, then regulations are necessary, and every right comes with responsibility. and OTT platforms can regulate themselves. If
And I think
that's
to
the
ensure that the
kind of
regulation, one, is framed in a way that it is meant to be, or it initiates and propels and enforces self-regulation, perhaps would be the best way forward. But Mr. Pavan Duggal, as well as Mithun Vijay Kumar, thank you very much for joining us with your time. An important discourse that's been going on in this country for a very long time, and possibly for many content creators to look within. Well, that's all we have for you in this bulletin. Thank you very much for tuning in. Up next at 7 o'clock, my colleague Shreya Upadhyay takes it over.